Let's do something different.
Yeah.
Tangent. Tangent. Tangent.
So you wanted to do a thing.
So I made some notes. Like I actually wrote shit down. Okay, so the proposal.
1971.
Well, I mean, Battlestar Galactica, right?
What are you drinking, man?
Oh, this is great. So we have a local brewery called Whitewater Brewing, and they make some reasonably good beers. They're mostly IPAs and kind of hoppy stuff. But I sent Cindy because she was there for lunch with some of her friends, and I was having some people over yesterday. I said, "Can you bring back like a sampler pack of their various different beers? Because they're the exact opposite of Steam Whistle, where instead of do one thing, right, where they make one beer, they make every kind of beer. They have seasonal beers. They have all kinds of thing. So please forgive me. I have pumpkin spice espresso porter. Thankfully, I've already had a pre-beer, so if this is terrible, I can just opt out.
Nice.
But I'm on a campaign of if people like pumpkin spice, let them have it.
Yeah.
I generally don't. So what have you got tonight?
I have No Boats on Sunday. It's a peach cider. Crafted with 100% Canadian apples. It's a peach cider, but whatever.
Should we go off on a tangent about how everything is apple juice? It's like you buy grape juice and it's like ingredient number 1, apple juice. What? Grapes are expensive, I guess.
So tell us about this thing, because you intentionally left me in the dark.
Well,
I was like, hey, do you want to talk about it and be like, figure out the what and the where and the when? And you were like, no, we'll YOLO it.
Yeah, it was very much a YOLO, largely because I hadn't made any notes about it. And I was like, I'll have time, because I pitched this, like more than a week ago. And I thought, I'll have time. I'll develop some stuff. I'll write some things down. So I have a couple of pages of, we'll call them notes.
The only context I have, the only prep I have is your message in Discord. World building episode? ?
Yep, that's it. That's the premise. So here's the proposal. Let's play God and build a world.
Okay.
So I wrote down some things about ideas and sort of themes that I would like to have. I would like to build, because we talked a little bit about systems, and I did a bunch of work on a sort of prototype system that I would like to talk about in another episode. It's not really ready for even. It might be ready for like big early discussions, but it's not even ready for like, hey, let's roll some dice and see how this works. But you were talking about, when we were talking previously about those kinds of things, about having a system that isn't really tied to like a specific setting or a specific, like, this is how it has to work, or here's the lore that goes with that system. And I thought, wouldn't it also be a great idea to have some kind of lore that would fit in any system? And I'm not sure it's possible. Let me say that up front. I'm not necessarily certain that we need to have that as an aim, but I would like to have sort of some bare bones stuff, because the other thing that I wanted to talk about very briefly, I think I made some notes in the second section about like, hey, are we starting up again? Are you running it or am I running it? Because I do want to do an in-person gaming group thing once a week with some local folks, which you and Tanya are absolutely welcome to come up, and and Ian and Chris, if you're listening, and almost anyone else that we know is welcome to come up and like do guest appearances or whatever. That could be a lot of fun. But I want to have a homebrew world to do that in, because I don't really like having to study a ton. Like, oh, I got to figure out, okay, well, in 1399 CR, where was Elminster on that second Tuesday of the month of whatever? What are the names of the months again? So I came up with like some sort of bits that I wanted to sort of include, and some questions about like what is actually required for this kind of thing. in the hopes that somebody out there would find it useful, and if not, at least you and I find it entertaining.
Oh, right.
So
we're
do you want
building
to
a world for a game system.
Yes.
Okay.
Our game system, another game system, any game system, sure.
In which presumably you or somebody else would be running a game.
Yes.
Okay. That's important for me. When I think about world design, like I need to think about what's the format, first of all. Because the world, like whether you're writing a book, whether you're making a game, the world is kind of a character in and of itself, but it also has a particular role to play.
Yes.
So the first questions I kind of ask myself are, if it's going to be a game, how do you want you and your players to feel playing in this world?
Ooh.
And
The vibe.
right. And what particular themes would you like to explore as dungeon master or game master within this world?
Okay. So I have some answers to the second question. I don't know if I have answers to the first one.
Okay.
And I think that like answers to the first one are sort of informed more by the group. I would like to leave that one a little bit more wide open as much as possible. Have like if you different areas of the world potentially have different sort of all right, like over here is cursed and you should feel like it should feel kind of gloomy and damp and dark, right? And over here is sunny unicorn land where everybody is happy and there's everybody has enough food to eat and nobody's oppressed.
Okay.
Not a lot of adventures happen over there. Everybody just goes there to retire because it's awesome. Okay, so here are the bits that I came up with for stuff that I want to have. So the history of the world is that at some time, some really long ago past age, some kind of cataclysm happened and a civilization collapsed. It was so long ago, nobody remembers anything about it, except that there are lots of buried ruins, right?
Okay.
Which gives you dungeons and things to go into. And it also opens up, if you want to create your own sort of stuff, it will completely fit, right? If you find an Egyptian ruin, yep, that was there too, right? If you find, like dungeon style dungeons from medieval Europe, those are also buried somewhere.
Okay.
The sort of principle that was working in my mind when I came up with that idea was the way that I think it's Chicago was built, where like they built the city and it kind of sank and they went, well, that's no good. So we'll build another set of streets right on top. Right. And that's kind of how this world was built. And also in a lot of, especially in like after the fall of Rome, like a lot of people took the Roman structures and went, hey, this is good stone. I'm going to steal some of it to build my house. Right. So you have all of these things that are sort of kind of there, but nobody knows really where they came from. Some of them are intact, some of them are not. Some of them have been discovered and well explored, some of them not so much. Some of them maybe people are living in, right?
Okay.
Like here's this giant tower of, some kind of stone-like substance that nobody knows how they made it, but it's literally indestructible, right? Like they've fired siege engines at it and it hasn't gone anywhere, but people are living there because it's still perfectly livable, right?
Okay. So that would lead into my second question based on sort of what you've established. What sort of broad strokes, technological level of advancement, the civilization that's gone, what did they sort of reach? What sort of level of technological advancement is the current civilization at? And how much cross-pollination and impact has discovering ruins and machines and whatever from the previous civilization had on the current one?
I hadn't actually thought about machines, but that might be informed by sort of the next point on my bullet point list. So magical artifacts are reasonably common, but are illegal for trade pretty much everywhere.
Okay.
So magic is pretty much distrusted, feared, often loathed as nobody has any proof or any history or any real knowledge about it, but everyone kind of assumes that some kind of magical war happened, and that's what caused the fall of the civilization.
Okay.
One of the things that is important, sort of in my brain, is that the fallen civilization, or maybe civilizations, there is no explanation for it,
Uh-huh.
right? Because if you explain it, then it's no longer like it needs to be
No, it's the
mysterious.
mystery. Yeah.
Yes. And solving that mystery is not anyone's quest. Like nobody's interested in solving that. There's no hooks for that. There's no oh, if I just take everyone has a theory, and everyone's theory is probably wrong.
Okay.
Okay, so it is illegal to do things with magic in public, again, for the same, fears and whatnot. Both divine and arcane magic. So the machines question is an interesting one because I think it would make sense to have, a few sort of um, gewgaws and gadgets and just things hanging around that some of them are like, oh, hey, this one seems to manufacture water out of thin air, and it's been running for the last 150 years, and we just don't touch it, and it just makes water. And here's the thing that when you push this button, it makes noises and there's lights, but we don't know what it does or what it's for.
Okay. So based on that, I assume that there was at least a reasonable level of technological advancement in the fallen civilization.
Yeah, some amount. It was
And
it was big. There was no doubt
yeah,
that it was big.
and it sounds like a relatively low level of sophistication than in the current civilization. So we're talking what would be an analog, like sort of the
Like
stereotypical medieval kind of.
later than medieval, but probably not quite Renaissance. Uh, and there would be a large disparity, sort of like from region to region
Sure.
potentially. But like the level of like the Three Musketeers would be sort of like top level technology.
Okay.
Give us a chance to feel a little bit superior to the heroes that are existing in the world. I'm playing as my hero, but in reality, I have better teeth.
All right. Do you have, I assume, plans for whether or not contemporary magic exists outside of the
It exists.
trinkets and doodads and relics and stuff? So are there
There would be like
innate
secret.
magic users?
Yes, there would
Okay.
be. They would have to stay hidden. It's very much a like if you're caught doing this stuff in public, pitchforks and torches,
Okay.
right? You think like persecution of witches in the crazy times. So like
Okay.
the accusation of, hey, this is a magic user is a very serious one. But there would probably be like secret underground societies and things like that, because secrets are important for this kind of thing. I think it would also be the sort of thing where like neighboring countries would go to war, and the propaganda that would be given to your citizenry to get them to go to war is like, those guys over there, they're using magic, they're going to break the world again, and we got to stop them.
Okay. So I know you said you'd probably wait until you knew what your players were going to be uh, before making some decisions, but I'm actually going to pull you back to that initial question. Not so much what you want your players to feel,
Hmm?
but in a broad sense, what sort of gameplay and mechanics would you like your players to explore, in particular as it relates to engaging with your world? Like you've set up this thing where magic is a taboo.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of what you would like to explore in this world?
Potentially a bit. It doesn't necessarily need to be. I think that the things that are sort of open for ideas, tropes, and sort of goals for adventurers, like exploration's a big one.
Okay.
All right, here's what we know, but here's an unknown. Like, go look at it. What do you find? That's interesting and neat, right? And being someone who sort of, I think that I'm actually drawing a little bit of inspiration here from Horizon Zero Dawn. which I didn't recognize until literally right now.
Okay.
Um,
That's funny, actually.
yeah, because it is. I mean, like this is basically what happened there, right?
Hmm.
And sort of like the exploration of ruins is not necessarily forbidden, but it's like, oh, you're one of those people. All right, children, stay back. But at the same time, if you get anything neat, right, where people want the stuff that you find, right, and there's a potential for financial gain there. There's a potential for finding something that could gain you prestige and political power. Um, but exploration is definitely one. The social dynamic is one that's interesting to me, but I'm not entirely certain that I would be good at developing that. Because I think that there's an awful lot of interesting social interfaces. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but there's an awful lot of interactions that could be neat between people who are interested in exploring magic and people who are fundamentally against it.
Okay.
Uh,
So you mentioned that magic would have both arcane and divine origins.
mhm.
So let's explore the divine angle. You're talking about gods, and how does that sort of work in your world?
Well, this is a thing, and this that needs to be left very loosey goosey, specifically because I don't want to tie it to a specific system, right?
Hmm.
The system that I'm developing, magic works very, very differently than most I've seen.
Yeah, like okay, let me
But
reframe this question.
arcane versus divine.
Let me reframe this question then. Let's pretend this isn't a role playing game for a second, and you're sort of rough outline of a world for a fantasy novel.
Sure.
Okay. So you don't need to understand the mechanics necessarily of a magic system so much as sort of a broad strokes. How does magic happen? The
Right.
relationship of magic to the world, the relationship of magic to gods or pantheon or divinities or whatever that is. So do gods roam this world of yours? Question number one.
No. In avatar form, no. Potentially as unseen forces, maybe.
Okay.
But I think that, in my mind anyway, uh, it's important that that remain an unknown.
Okay.
It's like, was that divine intervention, or did we just get really lucky? The reason I'm suggesting like arcane and divine is that oftentimes we as human beings sort of, if magic were real, I guarantee you that some of it would belong to the church and some of it would belong to not the church, right?
Hmm.
And that's just it's a social construct more than anything else, where it's like, oh, that's stuff that holy people do, right? And there's definitely not public acceptance of that.
Hmm.
And definitely it's definitely still illegal, but people would be much more inclined to turn a blind eye to the old lady at the end of the road who heals sick people, than they are to, the guy in the street corner who's juggling fire.
Okay. I'll simplify my question again because I think it's important to shaping the world.
Sure.
Do gods exist, or does the unexplainable exist and the people in the world try to explain it through the concept of gods?
I refuse to explain, specifically because it's unknown.
Okay.
Um, it would be like, as a real world analog, there are people who pray to gods and really really believe in them, and
Absolutely.
some of them can do, some of them bleed from 5 wounds and heal people. That's a deep reference. If you can tell me where that's from, I'll be impressed.
I feel like I should remember it, and I don't.
It was a pretty good movie, but it was from, I think, the 80s. So it was a minute ago. It's really not important. But there are
Mhm.
some people who believe that the abilities that they have are of divine origin. And there are some people who, believe that whatever they can do and whatever happens is 100% their own energy or just their understanding of the nature of the world.
Yeah, I think the fundamental difference between trying to draw parallels to our world and a world in which magic actually exists is that,
Magic actually exists.
yeah, right. It's more than just belief at that point if you've got
Yes.
magic and people capable of
Yes.
performing magic.
Yes, people definitely do perform magic, whether or not it is of divine origin and whether it comes from the power of gods or just some well of energy that exists is really dependent on your point of view.
Okay.
Right. And some people would look at the outcome of, flexing that kind of power as, well, that's obviously divine and that's obviously arcane, even though in reality, are they different? It might be just different expressions of the same, extra force, whatever that
Hmm.
is.
And
Magic.
that's something I've liked exploring. And I D&D fifth edition especially doesn't do it incredibly well. Like it pays lip service to it, but I I like the idea that magic, whether divine or not, actually has a single origin, but different
Maybe.
ways of manipulating that origin.
Yep.
You think about the difference between sorcerers and wizards,
Yep.
right? Like, wizards are all about creating this plan, this schematic for how we're going to channel this energy that comes from the weave, and this is big, long, sort of academic, drawn out process for harnessing this and bending it to a particular task.
And then sorcerers are like, YOLO, whoop.
Solos are just, yeah, but if I really want it enough, like that should be
Yep.
enough, right?
Yeah.
And hey, it's always worked for me.
Yep.
Where your divine classes are less about you directly manipulating the magic source, but using an
Please, please, please,
entity
please,
as a
please,
proxy.
please.
That
Yeah.
would apply to warlocks too.
Yes.
Um, I
The
like that, and I like the idea of exploring that a little bit more than you'd typically get in a D&D sort of
well,
setting, without
fifth.
getting like
Oh, it's way
weird about it, right?
metaphysical. Yeah.
Yeah, or like I know that there's certain Strixhaven probably comes to mind that embraces that school of magic kind of thing for D&D and Magic the Gathering before that, and
The fifth edition, making it simplified is actually a very conscious design choice
oh,
because
absolutely.
in the original Dungeons and Dragons, like if you want to be a paladin, you got to be lawful good and you have to choose a god. And if you do anything that makes the god upset, congratulations, you're a fighter. So,
Okay, so you mentioned Horizon Zero Dawn and that
yeah.
that world, our world. That game, like the,
Hmm.
the the present timeline in that game, has a very, very specific flavor that separates it from generic fantasy-ish, medieval-ish,
Yes.
sword and boardish type settings. Do you have any particular flavors in mind? Kind of thing that, like, if I were an alien and I were to come to this world, and I've seen 100 other worlds or game settings or systems or whatever,
Hmm.
and then I stumble across this one, what's going to jump out at me?
Uh, okay. So everything on the surface. Okay. So here is kind of a tagline approach to the idea. Everything seems normal on the surface. Another sort of thing that I was thinking about when I was considering this is the idea of the Underdark,
Okay.
which is basically like a whole underworld. I don't really want to do Underdark, right? It is literally a new world built on the ruins of the old,
Right.
right? Sometimes borrowing bits of it, sometimes outright stealing bits of it, sometimes dismantling some of it to build up the new. That's really the biggest flavor thing. I think that if you consider that it's an entire world, then like you and I would probably be most comfortable building up an area that is sort of European in flavor, from medieval through Renaissance.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a world, so it could very easily be built on Eastern societal tropes, or African, or like, hey, here's an island in the ocean where we used to send prisoners, and now they've developed a society, right? So it makes sense to have. I almost think that I would like to take a map of our world and say, bunk, this is a thing that happened here. It's not our world. It just has continents in exactly the same shape. Just so that if someone else wanted to use it, they'd go, oh, well, here's where I live. I'm going to go to Google Maps and plunk, here's my town with all the street names removed. This is my map, right? Let's put things down. I'm not sure that works. I'm not sure that Google would allow that. I mean, not like they can stop us. I took a screenshot. Catch me.
So, so what would be the level of urbanization in this world?
Low, very low. I had some thoughts about that, and I'm not entirely certain how comfortable I am with the idea of whatever catastrophe happened. Um, the birth rate for the societies, for everyone, for the entire planet, have basically dropped off. So like growth levels are very low. I don't know, 90% of the population of the world died, and it hasn't really grown a whole lot since then. It's not like like, I don't want to get really really dark or anything. It's not like, oh, there's plagues every once in a while that wipe people out, but once populations reach a certain size, they just stop growing, right?
Yeah.
So you have 10% of, like, which would be like a billion people ish on the whole planet, and that level is reasonably stable.
Okay. What extent of globalization has reasserted itself? So, like, how much contact do these isolated populations have, both with neighboring populations and distant
Reasonable amounts,
populations?
I think. Just going based on sort of how most natural populations work, something like 70% of people are happy to be born and live and die within a 10-mile radius, and
Hmm.
30% of people are like, hey man, what's over the next hill, right? And sometimes they're over the next hill and over the next hill and over the next hill, and they go everywhere, and then they come home and tell people about it.
So, is this a world, um, you know, pre 1492 Europe, where there was entire continents on the planet that nobody knew existed
Well, there were some
from
people
the
who
other
knew.
side of the world, right? Like,
Yeah.
nobody that lived in Europe knew existed. Is
I
that sort of
think
a thing, or do you think this is a world that has been reasonably well explored at this point?
I think probably there's lots of people who think that most of the world is known, but there would still be areas of the map, especially because it needs to be left open for, hey, let's do something new in the future, right? So there's blank areas of the map that would
Hmm.
be like, here be dragons. We don't know what's over there, right? People have probably been, they just didn't make maps,
Yeah.
or maybe they didn't come back. Yeah.
I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but
Yeah, you
because
should.
I
I
knew
mean,
nothing coming into this. But to back up to sort of my approach again for world building, specifically for role playing games, Dungeons and
mhm.
Dragons tabletop, you can kind of think of it almost like three circles, right?
Like we're
The
talking Venn diagram or into out.
into out, sort of nested.
Okay.
That sort of imagine a circle, a small circle at the bottom of a grid, and then the bottom overlaps, but you have another circle, and then you have another circle, kind of
Oh,
thing.
okay.
So that smallest circle is sort of your local world.
Right.
You're starting a game, session 0, session 1. You need to have this reasonably well established.
Yes, it's what's the little town just south of Baldur's Gate, that gets used a lot.
Like Candlekeep or
No, Daggerford.
yes. Yeah. Then you have the sort of regional world
Yep.
that you need to have enough detail prepared to sufficiently improvise, right?
Yep.
We're going to go here. Hey, what's down that road? People are filtering into this town. Where are they coming from?
Yep.
Okay, well, that person's from this place. Generally, what do they do there?
Mhm.
Broad strokes, kind of point form preparation, just enough detail that you can fill in the blanks without having to make up something completely from scratch.
Yes. And then you've got the rest of the world, which is more or less almost blank.
Almost blank in terms of detail, but
Yep.
also some of your strongest kind of key pillars for how the world functions exist here. Now, those have been sort of some of the questions that I've been asking now.
Yes.
Does magic exist? Where does it come from? Levels of technology, the amount of globalization, things like that.
Yep.
Continents are here. These continents have names. People do or don't live on them. That's probably enough.
Yes.
For that outer circle for now, and then as your game moves into and this is why I like the idea of the circles that kind of overlap, because it isn't just you're in this big circle now. It's your small circle is kind of expanding out to overlap with this part of this inner circle or middle circle. And then by doing that, you need to then flesh out some of the details of the biggest circle that are closest to the point that they've kind of moved out into there. So you have players, you have just, we'll say, a random set of pretty prototypical characters created for this world, performing the usual sort of roles. And you're about to run a session 0.
So you're asking me, what do I tell them?
Well, we've explored the broad strokes of this world a little bit now.
Yes.
And I know I'm getting ahead of what you've probably prepared, but you now
That's
want
fine.
to bring people into this world at sort of that local level.
You all gather at the local inn. There is beer flowing freely, and a comely young woman who is distributing drinks to patrons in the bar.
Does she have 8 legs or 2?
That's okay. So that brings me to I had those notes that we sort of went over, and we've covered a couple of things, various places that because these are very good questions, because you and I approach these things very differently, and I find your views inform my blind spots really well. So I wrote down this is for discussion way later. I wrote down a list of places.
Okay.
Right. So where we exist right now has no name. Oh, by the way, the very first thing that I wrote down was the world. Name? Question mark. Right? Because
world.
Yeah, for now. But that's one of the things, because I have a list of here's things that I need to figure out. So I have a list of places. There are 4 of them. In the far west is a place called the Shadowlands. What does that mean? I don't know. It's far away in the west. Don't worry about it. The Great North Wood. It's very woodsy. Not a lot of people live there. I mean, I live there. It's literally going to be, it's my house. The Eastern Mountains, they're very big. No one we know has crossed them. And the Southern Desert, which again is like more or less uncrossable. People have done it, but all of these things in my mind are, hey, here's things to plant in your mind as seeds of places you may want to go and explore. And that's kind of that for me right now is that outer circle, right? The sort of this is how far these are places that have names, but no details. So that's for discussion later.
And realistically, I would think that would actually need to be the middle circle. Like thinking geographically,
yes.
there's world, and then
Yeah.
the analog would be the known world. Think back in sort of cradle of civilization, Mesopotamian times, where it's like, well,
Yes.
we got everything around the Mediterranean here, and this little bit over here in this sandy area, and this bit down here before we get to a bigger sandy area, and then there's this big grassy field up here.
Yep. Yeah.
Which realistically speaking is sort of the little area between, say, the Eurasian steppes and northern Africa and what we would now call the Middle East,
Mhm.
and what would have been sort of Eastern Europe, a very, very small slice of the
The
Eurasian and
world.
African continent called
Yeah.
the known world.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to describe it. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
is that you've got like your local area, which is like, everybody can walk that in a day.
Yeah.
Because Tolkien is in my brain as I'm doing this as well. And the idea that in the movies, right, Samwise gets to a certain point and stops, and like they're in the middle of a cornfield, and Frodo's like, "What's the problem? If I take one more step, I will be farther from home than I have ever been."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everything inside of that, everything inside the Shire is, you can go there, you can do things, the people, and even if you don't know the people,
Mm-hmm.
they're local, right? You can say, "Hey, I'm from down the road," and they'll be like, "Okay, we have something in common. We have some sort of shared value system, whatever that is." Even if we disagree about whether mushrooms are delicious or not, we both understand that mushrooms are important, right? That kind of thing. And then you've got like the outside, which is sort of if you go as far as Brie.
Right.
Um, and I do agree with you that those places I listed are sort of in that middle circle, which
Mm-hmm.
is
So areas you need to know enough about to improvise,
yes,
because realistically, people in your local area, like, they could be traveling to and from those areas in a reasonable amount of time. Your
yes,
players mid campaign could be like, "Hey, you know what? We're tired of womping rats.
yeah. Let's
Let's
go
go
fight a
somewhere
dragon.
else."
Yep,
And
yep,
those are the places they're going to branch out to. So you need to have a little bit more framework preparation in those spots, I think.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like those are like
Yeah.
next on the list for development. But yes,
Yeah.
definitely you need local first. All right, so I have a list also of things that are needed.
Hmm.
And you mentioned about like, does she have 2 legs or 8? And the first question on my list is, what species are here, right?
Hmm.
And I think it makes sense to lean on, uh, you know, again, like if you are using this in your neck of the woods, you go, hey, what kind of creatures do we have around here, right? So for me, it would be like raccoons and bears and moose, right? There's squirrels and various birds. They're not really important, but the flavor is whatever is local. But
Let's
I was
let,
thinking
let's move
about
that up
like
the food chain a little bit, though, and talk.
humans and orcs and dwarves and elves and
Yeah.
things like that, right? And I don't know the answer to that question. That's why it's a big question mark. Um, and I was kind of thinking that this would be like a collaborative effort, as it has been, as it is
Hmm.
continuing to be. So I would really like your input on what kind of species should there be. Humans, because we identify with those most.
I mean, the obvious answer up front, and it's more a question than an answer, is how much work are you prepared to put into exploring the idea of multiple species? This is where the lines between species and races and stuff blend in, and not piss a whole bunch of people off by doing it. Because it's generally easy to like to just do humans and have different sort of cultural centers that have their own flavor, but they're not different species with different abilities, and there's no sort of superiority shit going
Yeah,
on here, right?
I really think that I mean that again, because I want the setting to be a little bit system neutral.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say that there aren't any, but I'm kind of the my opinion is that I would like everything to be human or humanoid, as much as Lae'zel hates the term humanoid. Because after all, we are a BG3 podcast, right?
Of course.
Now that you've stopped playing. Rather than, various species or races as they've, sort of traditionally been called, being defined, I think that's flavor for whatever you want to do in your particular game. Right? The world is reasonably human centric. And in my, because what I really want to do, if I can convince people to do it, is like play test out my system in
Mm-hmm.
like in an in-person game. And a lot of things that are traditionally, uh, like this is what humans are, and this is what orcs are, and this is what elves are, is just flavor, right? If you want to say you have pointed ears and wings, that's fine. You can't fly and you don't hear any better. Carry on. Describe your character as your character is. And you choose to build out your character however you want your character to be.
Mm-hmm. But
Uh,
that's an important distinction, right? Because we're now talking about flavor descriptions of basically the same thing. We're not granting bonuses to
right.
different species or different races. Like I think you have to avoid the pitfalls of that. You almost have to either don't do it or really really lean into it, so that like I go back to the Mass Effect universe a fair bit. You look at the alien species there, and yeah, to a certain extent, there's a lot of like Star Trek, humans with shit on their forehead kind of thing happening with some of the races, but there's a little bit more to it than that. But some of them are so physically, get basically a floating jellyfish for
Yeah.
one, or you've got something that looks like like imagine a cow or an ox evolved into a sentient species on a very high gravity world, right? They're
Yeah.
they're basically like an elephant without a trunk,
Mhm.
So then you can explain away differences in a way that doesn't sound like people
Right.
aren't going to be offended by, hey, this person, this species evolved on a world where the gravity is 3 times stronger than it is here, so they're
They're
used to
stronger.
holding up their own weight. They're a little bit
Yep.
stronger, or these guys are amphibians, so they have some characteristics that are
They can swim.
breathe
Like
water, or something like
it's
that.
or hold their breath a really long time.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the goblins are evil, and dwarves are insert Jewish stereotype here, or you know elves are effeminate, things like that when you get into those areas, like it's probably better to just avoid it if I were building a
Um.
world.
Yeah. So, world-wise, I think there needs to be room for, if you want to plunk down a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons adventure here. Yeah, there's elves and dwarfs, but as far as the setting is concerned, everyone is the same. And if you're going to add in like various different kinds of monsters and things, which is sort of the intent, they're literal monstrosities. It's not, here's a human person who is transformed into a thing, so maybe they're redeemable, right? I as much as I would be interested in sometimes exploring social themes, I don't want to get into the are they good or evil or not argument too much,
Okay,
right?
that
If you're gonna go,
that's
if you're gonna,
important.
yeah, if you're gonna go hunting dragons, it's because dragons are mindless beasts who eat people and burn towns just because they like to. Dragons are basically cats
Okay.
if they were big and flying and breathing fire.
Okay.
Like, oh, it'd be fun to set this on fire. I'm going to set that on fire, and then I'm going to poop on it, and then I'm going to barf on it.
But hey, that's an important sort of thing to keep in mind as you're planning out your world, because it's not just about races and monsters. It's about institutions and
Politics and religion are the next questions on my list.
cults, crime,
Yes.
underground organizations, like if you really want to avoid exploring morality and
No,
the
I don't.
nuances of it.
I don't want to avoid exploring morality, and there are some nuances that I want to avoid. I want to avoid the idea of, for example, the drow race,
Yes,
right? Like
absolutely.
that's just like that's a no-brainer. Like that's
Yep.
just not. It's not like, hey, these people look different. They're pretty much people, just like other people, but they look a little different, so they're evil.
Hmm.
I want to avoid that at all costs. There are some monsters, and the monsters are just monsters, and there are some people who are also bad people.
Okay.
And depending on what kind of a game you're going to be playing, you worry about one versus the other, right? Like in the one thing, it's like, hey, we're going into a dungeon. It's full of monsters. We can kill the monsters and take their stuff. It's fine. They're monsters, right? There's monsters and Nazis. That's what's in the dungeon. And then there's other sort of things where you can do where it's like, oh, hey, here's this secret underground cult, and they're trying to reactivate this machine that might just be the machine that broke the world. We should probably stop them.
Hmm.
Also, gosh, do they have branches in every town we know about? Oh no. Right, but those are two very different kinds of games,
Hmm.
and both need room to exist. Okay, so yeah, we've gone kind of over the stuff that the broad strokes of things. So politics, religion, regions, and customs, I think, is kind of an important thing. Like, what is we sort of covered that by, hey, what do they do over there? Um, the idea of a map is probably important, at least for the local stuff.
Hmm.
So here's some things that I would like to actually not. I mean, maybe brainstorm now, maybe go away and work on and come back.
Yeah, I've been
Uh,
asking questions, and you've been doing a lot of talking. So, like, feel free to
okay,
flip this
so
around here.
so here's the thing: is that like one of the things that I have a great deal of trouble with is coming up with names for
Okay.
things. So some things that I need names for: the world, which is like not super important. It's more or less like a title for the whole thing.
Hmm.
Um, for now, the world is fine. But there needs to be a name for whatever the local town area, whatever is. There needs to be one for sort of the region that we're starting in. I have the sort of four, outer circle type places. But
Hmm.
I'll need some stuff in there. Um, and here's something that I thought, just because one of the things that really makes a world feel alive is a little bit of history that's maybe not real. Do you know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like Paul Bunyan type stuff.
Hmm.
Myths and legends. Really only names though. And I don't know if that's something that you want to brainstorm now. You got anything off the top of your head? The name of something that is mythical or legendary.
Well, the just talking about names in general, I think there's some sort of, and this could be different for each region,
Hmm.
but there's some things you probably want to establish up front. And this is a common fantasy thing, right? Where you're trying to portray a world that is fantasy, and how many syllables does all your heroes' names have? Like, are people here called um, Bob and Jim, or are they generally called um,
I
Legolas and Dernick, and names that
potentially
maybe don't
potentially
have?
both.
Okay.
One of the things that I really like, have you read? I can't remember if we've talked about Gardens of the Moon, Stephen Erickson.
No, I've Steven Erickson's on my list of stuff to read.
Probably jump there next.
Yeah,
Although those are big. I mean, they're big and epic. They're
that's part of
great.
the Malazan stuff, right? Yeah.
Yes. Specifically, one of the things that I really like is the Malazans, the ones in the, what do they call their military thing? The Legion, something something. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
It's not.
The only thing I really know from all of that stuff is the Bone Hunters, just because I was in a WoW guild that borrowed that name. But
Okay. Yeah. Well, the bone is it the Bone Hunters? What is it? What is the name of? Anyway, there's the Malazan military thing, and I forget what they're called because I'm 2 beers in now. They when they join the Legion, they take new names. So whatever their names were before, they get named by the sergeant who sort of trains them
mhm,
based on what he thinks they are, right? So like one dude showed up with a broken fiddle, so he called him Fiddler,
mhm,
right? And like one guy is called Whiskey Jack because he was whistling the tune that because a Whiskey Jack is also called a Gray Jay. We actually have them here. He was whistling the tune that they do, or something like that. So there's like one guy called Boots. Um, there was like so I really like the idea of names that are things, right? Like really simple names. If you think about, my name is Two Dogs Fighting, or Two Wet Dogs or whatever, and like you should hear what my older brother was called. That the
mhm.
kind of thing where people are named after something that is experiential in their world.
No, and that's kind of where I was going to, because this
Yeah.
this this reflects everything else. Like when you're thinking about naming cities, if that's your approach to naming things, then even if
Oh,
you're going to
very
give
little.
cities like funky names, you look at your map.
Stonebridge.
Yeah, you look at a map and you need to say, okay, I want to put a city there. Why do I need to put a city there? Well, I need something there that does a thing. What do the people in this town do? What's the
Yeah.
primary industry? Blah. Like that's your bullet. Like this is your middle circle now. There is a
Yeah.
city. It's called this. Primary sort of reason for that city being there is there's mines. Because
Yeah.
there's mines, I know now that I can improvise things around, okay, well, there's mines there. What does that mean? Well,
Well,
there's going to be a lot of people there. There's going to have to be sort of a support community for the mines. There's going to have to be people dealing with import export. So there's going to be people moving in and out of that area. It's going to be
yeah.
a ton of smiths. Going to be a ton of
It's
boom.
called the
I got
it's
enough
called the
detailed
Iron Forge.
improvise. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's called Coppertown, or it's called Copper Run, or it's called Silver Hill.
Yeah. And even if you don't get quite so literal with the names, you can kind of use that as the starting point, right? And
Yep.
then say, well, yes, this town maybe was once called Iron Forge 400 years ago, but the
Yeah.
mines dried up. The dialect has shifted, and now it's called something that is
It's
kind of like Iron Forge.
yeah, like Rusty Anvil. Or Rust something or Rustville. Yeah. Okay. So yes. I think I like the idea of them being reasonably literal, though.
Okay.
So I need to come up with some names of like myths and legends, things that are, I don't know, like the lost city of Atlantis, or the legend of El Dorado, or Paul Bunyan again is uh,
Hmm.
a thing. I need to come
Well,
up with some artifact level items.
yeah. So the first obvious thing is you're going to have legends that are just completely random, but you're
Yep.
going to have a lot of legends that are based around this civilization that existed before. Maybe it's not direct knowledge, firsthand accounts of that civilization, but it's somebody found a thing and they tried to explain it, and their explanation, like a game of telephone, has has changed and evolved and been exaggerated over the years.
Hmm.
The root for it might be, well, they found something that was basically a car.
Yeah.
This world doesn't know what cars are. You know, the horseless carriage, and you turn that into something. All of a sudden, you've got a chariot of the gods kind of situation or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Like that'd be a good way of coming up with it. Figure out what the technological level of that long lost civilization was.
Mhm.
Figure out things like, hey, if we're going to establish that we're mostly humanoid in the present time, are we descendants from that civilization, or was that something else? Are we talking about
Or
sentient dinosaurs? Are we talking about, you know,
Dragons.
And then, well, then you're going to take sort of the imagery that's established by things like finding bones, fossils, and turn that into dragons. There's a reasonable chance that our own sort of mythological dragons have come from, and I mean, nobody knows this for sure, but have come from people finding
Dinosaur
fossilized
bones.
dinosaurs,
Yeah. Well, it
you
makes
know,
sense.
especially
Or
incomplete skeletons, right? Because you're just trying to explain, these giant jaws or,
or like the skeleton of an elephant if you happen to be from like northern Europe, where it's like, what the hell is this?
yeah,
This
well,
is
absolutely.
huge. It's a cyclops, for goodness sake.
Yeah. So I think if you flesh out just high level details about what that civilization was and what things, even just physically, make them different from the contemporary civilizations and cultures, that will inform where you go with a lot of those myths. And then the other ones you can just kind of flesh out is like campfire story kind of stuff. I don't know that you need to probably have a lot of those prepared in advance. I think maybe in your local area, your local
Yes.
town, you're going to want to establish some key events that happened in the past for your village or town, establish some local hero figures who founded the town. If there was a major conflict in the area, who won that major conflict. Something as simple as like, was there a major fire at some point and one local hero stepped up and saved a bunch of families from certain death. And then you just exaggerate those stories
Hmm.
and turn them into the Paul Bunyans and
And the
the
balders.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I have a good path forward. Here's a question for
Mhm.
you. Are you willing to come up with some things and share them with me?
Sure.
Cool. Because that's like, because I'll do some of that too, right? Like I also enjoy that, but it's nice to have things that didn't come out of my own brain.
Okay,
Because
so that's the clear thing we should establish up front then.
yes,
Until we started talking about this is your thing.
yes,
Do you
I'm
want this to
intent.
be a mostly your thing or a eventually our thing kind of thing? Like how
I,
much?
I think I would like it to be our thing. I think though that I would like either one of us to have veto power over anything.
Okay.
Does
Well,
that,
I mean,
that
this
sound
is
fair?
like this whole thing is the result of your own sort of wanting to do this. You have your own reasons for doing this, so it makes sense that ownership of this. I'm not talking about, hey, we're going to monetize it down the road and you're going to get
Yeah.
51% or whatever. I'm talking about like,
I'm fine with 50 and a half.
you know, I'm talking that this is still your thing that you've asked me to help you with, but ultimately I'm helping you build this rather than building
Sure.
my piece of this. And I'm cool
Uh,
with that.
I mean, either way, we'll
The
see.
line between those is blurry, but you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to just,
Yeah,
how I present information to you will remain. I was thinking this would be cool. What do you think? Versus I put this town here and this is what the people are like.
yeah. I think. I mean, is it in the end? I think the idea of the world is big enough that it might make sense for us to do that. At some point, we probably need to have a little bit of sort of like mutual buy-in for it. Like
Mhm.
if there's something that just makes either one of us go, oh no, then I think it's a no. Because if we both say no, then it's probably a bad idea.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Um, but it would be neat to have, especially it would be neat to do like, okay, I'm gonna, have my tabletop play through thing, and it's gonna develop this, and this comes out of that, and maybe you do similar, or maybe you just write some shit down,
Mhm.
and then maybe there's a little bit of crossover where I do some stuff in your area and go, here's something that I noticed was missing, and here's what I put there. What do you think?
Mhm.
Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, well we'll do something else then. Um, but it would very definitely give it, 'cause in that way we might have two sort of separate things that are loosely connected with a reasonable amount of thematic overlap, but
And
enough
that's
difference that they feel different.
and that's appropriate, right? Like I mean,
Yes.
I don't imagine that somebody living in the middle of ancient Assyria and somebody living in well, what would have been around at the time, uh,
Uh,
far side of
everything.
China, let's say,
Oh
like
yeah, they'd be
there
they'd be
there
different.
would be significant differences in literally everything.
Yes, yes,
So
literally everything.
so I mean that's appropriate, and then you sort of massage them to make them fit together eventually.
Or
Um,
you collaborate on an area in between where there's a little
right.
bit of overlap. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at a lot of the Forgotten Realms is probably a good example of like it started off as an Ed Greenwood thing,
Mm.
but the amount of detail that he put into it versus what it is now after everybody else has had their hands on it, they've kind of created their little pieces of it, and then through iteration and iteration and iteration they now kind of, okay, well, we have a good picture of what this continent, uh Faerun in the world of Toril looks like. We still really don't know
Yes.
too much about some of these other places, but
There's some people who have done some stuff in
mm,
other places. But yeah, I agree with your overall point. That's exactly what I'm looking to do.
mhm.
Um, and I don't for a moment believe that we'll be as wildly successful as they were.
No.
And that's fine. I'm really just looking for I want something that I don't have to go looking up and go, I don't want to step on any toes. I need to know what the history of this is. I need to know what that looks like. I need to know who's there. This is something that, came out of our brains. I'm reasonably familiar with it, and it's generic enough that if I need to make something up, nobody's going to go, "Oh my god, the Purple Riders of Azun would totally fly in and tell you you're not allowed to do that."
Mhm. And that's, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't like baggage.
Yeah.
I tried to walk the line, like in my D&D campaigns, right? Like, yes, this exists in a world that had been very well developed at some point, but it's post-apocalyptic in nature, because I wanted to like get rid of all of that baggage, but I still wanted to have some things that I could lean on, Hey,
Yep.
elves used to live here, and there's some mountains here, and my players, because when I designed it, it was meant for new players,
Hmm.
so had the ability of material to look at it, like even a map of the Sword Coast, and say, okay,
I know where
now
I'm at.
my city of Hope is built on the ruins of Waterdeep, but I can see where Waterdeep was, and I can see where it is relative to some of this other stuff. Get a feel for
Hmm.
broad stroke kind of things that apply to this world as well.
I love maps as well. I love drawing maps. I love making maps. Um, I'm not sure I'm any good at it, but I also have this idea that I want to like actually 3D design dungeons, because I mean that's what I do every day, right? Is design things in 3D.
Hmm.
Like it would be super cool to do like a cutaway sort of isometric 3D dungeon and go, here's a dungeon, and I know where everything is relative to everything else. But details, those are details for later. I think this has been like really awesome because it's got there's a few sort of different ways of looking at things that I've got here. And like you've also pointed out an awful lot of work that I need to do, and I hate you for that.
Yeah, the if I can leave you with one bit of homework,
Okay.
and don't take this as a criticism, because you're very in early stages of just thinking about this. I suggest thinking about giving your world something that makes it feel unique from other fantasy settings.
Oh, but
You
really what
know,
I wanted to do is I wanted to copy all of the cool things from all the ones I like.
well, and you can do that and make it your own, but you know, the, you referenced Horizon Zero Dawn, for
Yep.
instance. Okay, what is it that makes that feel unique? Just walking around the world.
There's robot animals.
Yeah, just giant robot dinosaurs, and wow, isn't that cool? And I'd sure like to know what they're all about.
Well, I think that the idea that especially if like a cake, it had layers. Um, what if this isn't the first time this happened? Right? Every layer that you go deeper is an older civilization, and there's less
Yeah,
and less of it left.
but that's just normal, right? Like that's how our world works. Like, you know, you
Yes.
think of them. I forget the name of the scientist. He was a fucking moron. Um,
Oh, would you like a list?
Schlieffen. Anyway, he's the guy that was obsessed with finding the city of Troy, believing that it
Okay.
exists from Homer's Odyssey, and he tracked it down to a particular location where there was like actual stuff now. And he's like, well, Troy will be the thing at the bottom of this. And he blew most of it up with dynamite and then realized actually the Troy that exists in the Iliad was like the fifth layer up. And there was a bunch of shit below that. And he blew
Right.
most of what he was looking for up trying to get to it. And now, I mean, that's kind of a silly thing, but that just illustrates how,
Oh no, everything is built on the layer of the thing that comes before.
yeah,
The okay, so what makes this okay,
yeah, like a
just
visual, like, you know, think of it even bigger. Like just I'm literally standing in the world, looking it around, try and give it something a little bit unique. Like if you, for instance, thought about something that was steampunk, you know, you're
mhm,
going to have, there's going to be an aesthetic, but you're also going to have, ooh, like look at these funky airships and stuff filling the
right.
sky. And that's sort of a unique, tangible setting that sort of informs the basic flavor. Horizon Zero Dawn, you got the robot dinosaurs. Like it's still a very kind of like a tribal setting because it's sort of in early stages of development, but a lot of a lot of that has been influenced by the shit that
Robot
they're finding, right?
dinosaurs.
Robot
Yes.
dinosaurs and whatnot. So if you want to establish that there was a technological civilization, for instance, that existed before but collapsed, people just disappeared. You don't have to, you know, fill in the blanks and sort of spoil the mystery. But I think making that much more just visually evident in the world, you know,
Well,
like
that
I like
was
that
kind of
idea of where you know, you find these materials that, you know, you can shoot it, they don't break, those kinds of things. Like maybe the entire landscape is dotted with these very sort of strange looking,
yes.
you know,
I was
they're not layers deep. We're just seeing the top half of them that's still sticking out or something
yes.
like that, right?
And that is exactly what
Okay.
I was going for, is that like there's multi it's not so much that you have to go down, but if you do go down, there's stuff there.
Hmm.
Right. And it's not like a connected underworld. It's not like maybe there is like a subway system kind of thing. It's like there are roads under the earth,
Hmm.
like entire highways that go
Like it's
perfectly
sort of a
straight for
cliched
miles and
thing,
miles.
right? But like
Yes.
imagine, you know, humans disappeared, what would Earth look like, especially our
Right.
urban centers in thousands of years? Like
They'd barely be here.
chances are there'd still be some skyscrapers that are standing and sticking up out of the ground. I mean, you would have,
Hmm.
you know,
It's
layers and layers
ruins.
of ruin kind of all between that kind of stuff, but there would be a very obvious
Mhm.
evidence
Yes.
that something significant was here before.
Yes, and that is I don't know if it's what makes the world unique, but that is very much the aesthetic that I was thinking of. Is that like there's stuff sticking up out of the ground. There are people still living in what we would consider kind of ruins, even though they're not ruined. There's some things that have fallen down. There's some things that are under the earth. There's
Hmm.
oceans have come in where there used to be people living, and there's some places where it used to be oceans, and now it's the oceans have moved. So you have these giant
Hmm.
like bowls of salt that are filled with strange things that look like boats, kind of, but they're absolutely ridiculously massive,
Hmm.
right? And you would have like things that would be analogous to crashed flying ships that are like more starship sized than like imagine like the sort of aesthetic of the crashed Star Destroyer in a New Hope Part Two. The heck's it called? The First Jedi.
uh,
Um,
Force Unleashed. No, not Force Awakens.
Force Awakens.
Yep.
Sorry, I do actually like the movie. I like a lot of
Yeah.
things about it, but it did not make a lot of impact on my mind.
I refer to Dan Carlin a lot when I talk about our episodes. He's sort of one of the big drivers of my interest in a lot of history stuff recently. If you don't listen to Hardcore History, check it out. But one term he uses a lot is his Statue of Liberty in the sand moment when you get to the end of Planet of the Apes and you realize,
Spoilers.
yeah, it's a million-year-old movie. Spoiler alert. But you realize, oh no, this is our world all along, right?
Yep.
And
That's
he sort of draws parallels to that to the Greeks fighting in the sort of late Greco-Persian wars, coming across the ruins of cities like Nineveh, completely abandoned. They're 5 times the size of any contemporary large-scale cities at that point. The walls 4 times as thick. You got 20 miles you got to walk around this city just to get around it, kind of thing. And that's sort of a Statue of Liberty in the sand moment for what would be actually relatively modern times, thinking about it. But the reason why that's important, going back to your world, is if you're going to have these ruins that are very, very evident, like they're dotting the landscape, and you have magic as a taboo and exploration of these ruins as something that is strongly discouraged, then there's going to be systems built around that.
Not necessarily strongly discouraged, more along the lines of and I don't know how to describe it, but think of it like a caste system, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got the sort of like high society fucks who are like, all of you are terrible people, and then you got people who are like, I don't have much, so I'm going to go and explore here to see if I can find my fortune, right? So they're hello, Kevin. So the people who go exploring in those ruins are very much considered the lower echelons of society, right? So it's not so much taboo to go. It's considered really unfashionable to be the kind of person who would go there,
Okay.
right? Think of it a bit like visiting a speakeasy.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody kind of wants to do it. It's really fun, but publicly you have to say, "Oh, I would never do that."
That's cool, and that's important, because now you can think about things like counterculture movements, like people who are really putting the finger to the upper echelon of society, that are using these ruins and stuff not just as tools, like the stuff they do it in private, but like literally wearing it on their sleeves. What does that look like? What kind of things are they finding?
Ooh.
Like, the
I wonder if I don't know if there's a good word to describe it, but what you've just described is like basically like archaeology punk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm writing that down. This may not sound like a good idea when I'm sober, but it sounds great right now. I need a catchier phrase for it.
I mean, you could also call it cultural appropriation, but it's probably distant enough that it doesn't matter so much. But you think of like the Egypt craze that happened in the 1800s, for instance, right, where everybody was just, they couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
Literally robbing tombs and destroying monuments just to get their little pieces of Egyptian doodads and eat mummies because it's supposed to prolong your life and heal you and all of that shit. But
so many things are so stupid. There was a great tweet. I don't know if it's as sweet now or whatever. But back in the day when it was still Twitter, when it was still a viable platform, there was a tweet that came out, and it was, name something that seems British but isn't, and the answer was the contents of the British Museum. And it's so true, and at the same time, it's so like it's just so counterintuitive. It's like, well, yeah. The question becomes with things like that sometimes is like, when when is it theft and when is it not? Now, obviously, that is 100% theft. Like it absolutely is. But at some point, it's like, okay, you dug up a thing. Like who does it belong to?
Well, and that's, looking at your setting here.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have people that are direct descendants or have a direct connection to the
It's too old.
civilization that created
Oh,
these, then
there isn't.
yeah.
But I think that there would be an interesting sort of angle to put like some sort of cultural movement, society, hippies, whatever, who do the same sort of thing that the modern druids have done with Stonehenge, where it's like, that's a druidic thing. Well, yeah, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
But we're claiming it anyway, right? It would be interesting to have a similar sort of thing where it's like, this is our culture, and we're the modern descendants or the modern inheritors of whatever the society is. That one doesn't sound as exciting to me as archaeology punk, but I absolutely love that.
But the vibe that you want to establish there will help inform the flavor that you put into whatever this civilization was.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you want to go after kind of a weird sort of technomancer kind of vibe that they had, and then what is that like when you're finding non-functioning shit 7,000 years in the future or whatever, but still trying to give it meaning and trying to impart function on it that doesn't necessarily reflect its original purpose. Yeah.
Like wearing a clock as a necklace.
Yeah, exactly. It's a funny thing that happens with a lot of archaeology and stuff, and you kind of make fun of it when it's just like, well, this had ceremonial purposes. This was a ceremonial thing, when we don't know what's going on, but we're just going to assume ceremonial.
Yeah.
Sort of religious, whatever.
People do strange things in the service of religion, though, man. Strange things. Anyway, this actually had a lot more mileage than I thought it was going to have. I honestly thought we were going to run out of things to talk about in like 15 minutes.
Well, you should know me way better than that.
Well, that's true. Me too. Like once we get talking about something, it's endless, right?
All right. So we'll leave you with this. What next?
Right. So, names. I need names for myths and legends and artifacts and famous adventurers. People who are potentially like Marco Polo level of famous, where maybe they're not from your area, but you've heard of them. Mm-hmm. And everything you've heard about them is probably wrong, but you've heard their names.
Okay.
Right. And I'm just looking for names at this point.
Okay. So then what I would say is civilization in its current-ish form has existed for about at least 500 years.
Yes.
If you're going to have these sorts of legends.
At least. Maybe even a couple of thousand.
Establish your local, where we're starting this campaign, your local town, city, village, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Establish a neighboring town, city, village on each side. And why they're there. What purpose did they serve at one point, even if they're not serving it now?
Okay.
And then based on that, just rough in, like 3 things that have happened in the last 500 years in this area. Towns, there was a conflict. One of these towns burnt down. Raiders came, unknown raiders from an area, and wiped everybody in this city out. Or there was, an earthquake or whatever. And then based on
dinosaurs.
That, well, maybe. One of these towns exploded for no reason.
It was dragged into Avernus.
Well, maybe they were mining and they found something they weren't supposed to. Who knows? But
they delved too deep.
They did. But based on that sort of 3-5 points of like what's happened in this area in the last 500 years, then you can establish some local folk heroes and stuff. And
there's been a fundamental misunderstanding. I was trying to assign you homework. I accept the tasks. I accept the tasks that you have given me. The task that I am giving you is literally, I want you to come up with a half a dozen names of things or people. That's it.
Okay.
Not even history if you want to. Like some couple
I
of tagline type things.
I need to
Just
know a
names.
little bit more then.
Okay.
Give me a reference for the area. Like, are we talking something that feels quasi-European kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we talking
It
villages? Are
could
we talking towns? Are we talking cities?
between villages and towns. I don't think there'll be any major cities. Like the biggest sort of center would probably be about the size of Picton.
Okay. And how far away are we from that center?
Uh, let's say 2 or 3 days walk.
Okay.
Um,
That's
so, and like, kind of what I'm thinking is I want like things from the level of I'm trying to think of something that would be super local, but something that would be like high school football hero type person who's someone that maybe someone who knows them, all
mhm,
the way up to potentially the hand of Vecna.
mhm.
Right. I'm looking for very, very random shit. Like if you're talking like artifact level stuff, it doesn't necessarily need to feel European, because if you think about
No, no,
some
no.
of the myths and legends that happened in medieval Europe, they were about, lands far away. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's wide open really.
Okay.
Let's come up with some shit and we'll workshop it.
Then what I need from you, before I get going, is give me your rough sketch map with your Shadowlands and your northern forests and all of that stuff.
Okay.
Draw an X on where I need to start fleshing out some world,
Okay.
and maybe mark on it any bodies of water, just loosely,
Okay.
and the location of, because I want you to add this for flavor, the location of significant ruins. Just like
Okay.
one big ancient city that like
Okay.
everybody knows it's there.
Okay. Well-known ruin.
Okay.
And I think we can actually wrap it up there. Like that was a lot of verbiage.
Mm-hmm.